but someone knows something, yet everyone plays ball. I say we round them all up, let's brain fingerprint them all.
Hello everybody, this is Eric Jose on Making a Murderer on YouTube. I cover the Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey cases, but also as time passes I've been covering other cases such as the Staircase or OJ and many wrongful convictions of youth. I go over the documents, the photos, the videos, anything case related, so stay tuned because I have many more videos just like the one you're about to see. Hey there, how you doing today, folks? Today we're going over, again, next segment of the motion for post-conviction relief, trying to prepare you guys for the upcoming filing by Zellner so that you know what she's talking about in that filing. So here we are going over the motion for post-conviction relief. Today we're going over the state's case at trial and the defense's case at trial and going through that so that you guys can understand what she's pointing out and what she intends to tear down, attack, refute, that sort of stuff. So that's what this is going to be, basically a list of for you guys to check out. So here we go. We'll get right into it, and we'll see you again at the end real quick. All right, hello everybody. How you doing? We're back here again today reviewing Zellner's motion for post-conviction relief regarding Stephen Avery. Obviously, this is going to be covering the state and the defendants or the defense's case at trial. And what she's going to be basically doing is pointing out the points that the case or the points that the state was making for their case, which she intends to, shoot down. And then she also points out a bunch of points for the defense that she doesn't think are so great, and she wants to, she has a bone to pick with him. Anyway, this is her pointing out all the things that she intends to refute for the most part, and so that's why she goes through the cases for the state and for the defense, so that when you see some of her later, evidence and those things, and she starts really attacking the state's case and pushing her claims of inassistance of counsel, you will understand why, because you've seen this segment and all the things that she's laid out. So that's the point here. So next slide, please. Okay, so the framework here is that we have the upload, which has the slideshow, and then the idea is there will be a live question and answer session that follows the preview presentations. So any questions you have during this presentation, please save your questions and note the slide number down at the bottom right hand side of when you had your question and what slide number your question occurred to you on, so that we will be able to better figure out what your question is about during the Q&A, the live Q&A. So just keep that in mind. Try to remember the slide number down at the bottom right when you have a question. Save that question for the live, and we'll be happy to answer it. Next slide. Kathleen Zellner brings 10 experts and 2 investigators to the table. She's developing strong evidence, or developed very strong evidence, which undermines, what is that again? That undermines the confidence in the verdict, which is the whole point of the motion for post-conviction relief, right? So we're going to keep hearing that. It's going to be the mantra. It's going to be the drum beat that beats throughout, all of Stephen Avery's post-conviction, litigation, essentially. But undermining confidence in the verdict again and again and again. So next slide, please. Okay, this is the expert squad. These are all the experts that Zellner went out and got to help her prove what she's basically saying is happening, and what she has basically found out about this and what she intends to refute. These are the guys that helped her do it, or these are the folks that helped her do it. So it starts out with Christopher Palahniuk, PhD. He's the guy over at Microtrace. He's the guy that he has the really, really powerful microscopes, the really, really super powerful ones. He's the one that determined that there was wood and paint embedded into the item FL, the bullet, not bone or any other material like that. So he's the one that determined that. So he's the guy with the super powerful microscopes and stuff like that. Then we got Lucian Haig. Lucian Haig is the guy that went out with Zellner into the desert and they were shooting at the pieces of bone. That's him. He's the guy who proves that 22 bullets, when they go through bone, they heat up and they actually absorb splinters of that bone as they go through. So he's the guy that helps her prove that. Then we got John DeHaan. John DeHaan is the guy who has tremendous experience with burnt human cremains, burnt human bodies. So he is a very, very specialized in that field, so that's why he's here. We got Stephen Symes, another microscopic examiner, basically. Then we got Stuart James. Stuart James is the blood spatter expert. You might remember him from episode 1 because it opens up with Zellner talking to him in episode 1 mainly. Talking about the blood. Talking about the blood in the RAV4. Talking about all various things about the spatter in the RAV4 and all that. So that's Stuart James. Then we got Carl Reich. Carl Reich's the DNA guy. He's the guy that's able to do the DNA testing and all that sort of stuff. He's that expert. Then we got Greg McCrary. Greg McCrary, who is very much like G-Man Steve Moore, who you saw me interview here on the channel. Retired FBI, and he was brought on board by Zellner to go through and look at the investigation, to look at the paperwork of the investigation, and look at it and determine if the investigation was proper. So that's why he's here. He's the investigations expert. Then we got Lawrence Farwell. Lawrence Farwell, you might recognize if you know Stacy Seabrook's song, Let's Brain Fingerprint Them All. That's who Lawrence Farwell is. He's the brain fingerprinting guy. I happen to find the brain fingerprinting very interesting. Some people feel that it's fairly dubious. You know, I'll let everybody decide for themselves how much stock to put in brain fingerprinting, but I do find it interesting. Larry Bloom, MD, to come to basically testify about the Brian Hillegas's bruised hands, basically. Then we got Bennett Gershman. Bennett Gershman is our expert on prosecutorial misconduct. That's this guy's game. He's been doing it for a long time. He's been doing it in New York, where there's a lot of people, a lot of population. I'm sure he got a lot of work there. I'm sure he never had a dull moment. And then we also have James Kirby and Stephen Kirby, and these are Zellner's guys. These are her investigators. These are the guys pounding the pavement, beating the street, getting out there, questioning people or trying to question people, and basically these are the guys out there getting it done, beating the street. So that's who those gentlemen are. Next slide, please. Investigation and experts undermine confidence in the verdict. There it is again, right? I talked about that drum beat, right? Right, that mantra. Again, undermining confidence in the verdict. The opinions of all these experts, combined with new investigation conducted by current post-conviction counsel's investigators, so strongly undermines confidence in Mr. Avery's verdict that justice demands that his conviction be vacated. Next slide, please. The case for the state. The motion for post-conviction relief lays out in over 40 paragraphs what Ken KRATZ and the state alleged during the trial. Kathleen Zellner does this to demonstrate to the court that they presented a false narrative. A false narrative undermines what? Confidence in the verdict. Again, there's that. It just keeps coming back up, right, folks? Okay, next slide, please. Okay, the state of Wisconsin versus Stephen Avery. Okay, so this is where we actually get into her going through the state's case. So, next slide. Okay. KRATZ repeatedly told the jury that this was one of the largest criminal investigations ever conducted in Wisconsin. And yet it was still piss poor. That's amazing to me. But anyway, state presented 396 exhibits, 53 witnesses, and 14 experts. The largest number of law enforcement officers and items sent to a crime lab ever at that time. All right, that's very interesting. All that, and they still got it wrong. Next slide. All right. Manitowoc County resources. This is according to the state. Manitowoc County resources needed for the investigation. KRATZ argued that the Manitowoc County remained involved because they had resources, for example, equipment, or relationships with people in the area that had equipment to use and everything, right? And that is why Calumet County was there, and that's why they remained. But how does having access to equipment equate to Link and Colborn being in Stephen Avery's bedroom, finding a key on the 8th search in the ridiculous fashion that they do? So anyways, so we all know that's completely hogwash, right? So anyways, next slide, please. All right, Mr. Avery was the last person to see Teresa Halbach alive, according to the state. The state's timeline suggests that Stephen Avery was the last to see her. KRATZ rejects alternate timelines from the bus driver and the tanker driver, which would indicate that Teresa actually left the Avery property. Next slide, please. Discovery of the victim's vehicle on the Avery property. Yes, right. Here we go. Miss Sturm, right? God led me to the RAV4. Okay, I know I've told you guys many, many times. This is how I feel about this. Look, I have nothing against the creator, but here's what I'm saying. Pam did not need any kind of divine intervention to find that RAV4. Okay, the thing was covered with a hood, branches, parked the opposite way as all the other vehicles that were facing in the place where it was parked, and it was double parked. The thing stuck out like a sore thumb. Okay, it just totally would have stood out and drew your eye, because that's what we do as humans. We look, when we just tend to pick out the thing that looks different. We tend to our eyes will pick that out. It's just the way we are. Most of us, most of the time. It's just something that we do. And that's what happened with the RAV4. It just looked so different than everything else. It drew the eye. So she didn't need any divine intervention. So anyways, yes, God led me to the RAV4, according to the state. KRATZ admitted in his closing, though, that the RAV4 was not visible in the November 4th flyover. And he claims it's because it was covered with a hood and branches. The very things that I'm telling you drew Pam's eye to the RAV4 are the things that he would have you believe are preventing you from seeing it in the November 4th flyover. Well, here's the thing. I would see that hood leaning up against it. Okay, that hood would be visible. It's a big piece of metal. Why wouldn't I be able to see that? Anyway, so that's what's going on there. Next slide, please. Mr. Avery was actively bleeding from a cut on his finger. A Q-tip stain was caused while turning the ignition key. Okay, I was explaining that a little bit earlier. It's pretty much impossible that he could have been turning the key and caused that stain that's almost 3.5 inches away. It's just bizarre. It's beyond ridiculous that they even try to claim that that was made while turning the key. Gunshots are the cause of death of the victim, according to the state. Leslie Eisenberg claimed and testified that the cause of Teresa's death was 2 gunshot wounds to her head. The state relied on Eisenberg, Olson, and Jansen to establish the manner of death. Next slide, please. Discovery of the damaged bullets in Stephen Avery's garage. Okay. Kucharski found 11 spent shell casing in the garage. Teresa Halbach's DNA on damaged bullet, item FL. Teresa's DNA is found on the item FL, the bullet fragment. Okay, these are all the things the state says, obviously, right? So, primary burn site was Stephen Avery's burn pit, according to the state. Teresa was burned in Stephen's fire pit. Ertl began recovering the bones with a shovel. That's interesting. Smelter and other possible sites were ruled out, okay? And 5 of the 6 Daisy Fuentes gene rivets were found in the burn pit. So those are the points that the state is making. Next slide, please. And reconstructed tooth proves that the cremains are Teresa's, according to the state. The state also claims that Avery was trying to destroy cremains, and basically that's where, hence the mutilation of a corpse. KRATZ said Avery moved bigger bones to the Dassey burn barrel to direct attention away from himself, as if that would work. Anyway. KRATZ minimized the findings of and said he would spend only 20 seconds on the bones found in the Manitowoc gravel pit. Yeah, that's right. Those bones that have now been given back to the Halbach's? Well, it's either those bones or animal bones were given back to the Halbach's, but either way. So you get my point, right? Anyway, next slide, please. Okay, Mr. Avery's DNA on the hood latch was from sweat. That's right, the good old, sweat DNA on the hood latch, right? Another stellar piece of logic by the state in this case. Mr. Avery's DNA found on the victim's vehicle key. Only Stephen's DNA is found on the key. Culhane proposes a theory called masking that could explain why only Stephen's DNA is on the key. Somehow Stephen's DNA is like militant, and it takes over any other DNA on an item and kills it and eradicates it so that only his remains. So it's anyway. I'm joking and being whatever, but the point is I think it's a pretty ridiculous claim. Next slide, please. And of course, we have the claims that KRATZ made in his closing about if the key was planted, it doesn't even matter, basically. But I do love this graphic. Link got the little key on his shoulder. But anyway, yeah, absolutely BS that KRATZ would even make that statement. Of course, it matters if the key was planted. So next slide, please. Prints on the RAV4 were not suitable for identification. There were 8 latent fingerprints lifted from the RAV4. Michael Riddle deemed they were not suitable for identification. So I guess she's going to have a bone to pick with this particular fact from the state. Anyways, next slide. Please. There we go. The state's theory of murder: mutilation of a body and concealment of a vehicle. There's an Auto Trader magazine in the trailer and proved that Teresa was there, according to the state. Narrative is that she was killed in the garage, according to the state. The RAV4 is backed into Stephen Avery's garage, according to the state. Miss Halbach is killed by 2 gunshot wounds. Eisenberg describes 2 entrance wounds, but no exit wounds. You got that, right? No exit wounds, right? Right. Okay. There were 2 damaged bullets eventually found on Mr. Avery's garage floor. Okay, so how did they get from inside of Teresa's head to the garage floor? Right? Anyways. Mr. Olson testified that the x-rays showed traces of lead in the skull fragments. Next slide, please. Teresa was thrown into the back of the RAV4 and left spatter on the interior of the cargo door. Stephen had a big fire at 7:30 p.m., according to the prosecution. Avery completely burned the body in his burn pit and moved some of the bones to Bar Bionda's burn barrel, according to the state. Next slide, please. Okay, according to Ken KRATZ, in order to believe that law enforcement had to be involved in the killing if you believe any planting occurred, and that is absolutely ridiculous, in my opinion. Absolutely ridiculous. I don't necessarily think any of these guys killed Teresa, but I think all of them were very eager to capitalize on an opportunity. That's really what it seems like to me. But anyways, we'll let that get argued about moving forward. But basically, that's it. KRATZ argued that if you believe planting occurred, then law enforcement had to be involved in the killing. So, next slide. And this is where I hand it over to Mr. Travis and let him go through the case for the defense.
Okay, thanks very much. Hello, everybody. And again, a big shout out of thanks. So I don't forget to JJ for doing this presentation. There you see the defense team. Both have their hands up with their right hands up to their mouths in deep analysis and thought, listening to something. Actually, I think they're looking over, probably they look like they're looking at the jury and trying to predict who's the foreman and if they can judge expressions on their face as to what the verdict is. Next slide. Okay, Kathleen Zellner in her MPCR discusses what the defense's arguments and theory was at the time of trial. Up there on the upper right, if you're following along with your own copy of the motion for post-conviction relief, the MPCR, that refers to paragraph 48 is where we're starting off. And she introduces the defense team and the trial witnesses. And Stephen Avery was represented by Dean Strang and Jerome Buting, who you saw just in the previous slide. In the defense, they called a total of 7 witnesses, 2 of whom were experts. She also points out in her brief at paragraph 48 that one of the state's witnesses, was Mark Wiegert, who we all know is the lead investigator for the state. He's in the bottom left photo there, holding up one of the license plates. Next slide, please. Teresa's killer was aided by media publicity. The defense team for Stephen discussed the publicity. It was massive. and that initially, right from the get-go, identified Stephen Avery as the last person to see Teresa Halbach alive. They argued that because of this, the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department had an investigative bias that was exploited by the killer or killers. They also pointed out to the jury that when someone is framed, there's a lack of evidence. They can draw reasonable inferences from that lack of evidence to cause them to come to a reasonable doubt. Next slide, please. There you see a photograph of the defense team. On the left is Jerome Jerry Buting. To his right with the glasses is Dean Strang. To his right is Thomas Fallon. Tom Fallon stayed on the case after the conviction and was on the appellate team up until about 6 months ago. And to his right is former Calumet County District Attorney Kenneth KRATZ, now disgraced and unable to practice law, Kenneth KRATZ. And in the back is Judge Willis, presided over the trial, and some of the early post-conviction motions, who has since retired.
And
Next
also
slide.
for those who may not recognize Fallon, he's the guy who said they do so at their own peril. Just so you guys get an idea of who that guy is. Sorry, go ahead, Trav.
No, that's exactly right. Next slide, please. The partial skeletal remains found in Stephen Avery's burn pit. In a closing argument, the defense argued that the most damning piece of evidence in the case were bones found in Stephen's burn pit. And they also argued that didn't seem to really make sense in the case, that they were moved. And they did that by noting that the state's own expert, Eisenberg, testified that only 40% of the bones were found in that burn pit. It indicated that the other 60% of the bones were not consumed by the fire. They pointed out that only 5 of the 6 rivets from the Daisy Fuentes jeans that were found in the burn pit, there was only 5, and there was no waste button. That was despite magnets and sieves being used to sort through all of the bones. They also pointed out that Teresa's house and work keys were never found. Next slide, please. Bones in Stephen's burn pit were moved. The defense claimed that all experts agree those bones were moved. They argued that KRATZ failed to explain how it happened. They argued that there was no evidence, on how or where Teresa Halbach was killed. They pointed out that the state was initially arguing that it occurred in the trailer, slit with a knife her throat, about all of the evidence on that. They then changed it to she was killed in the garage. They pointed out that there was a second bone site, that bones were found in Barb's burn barrel. And they also pointed out a third bone site where suspected human bones were found at the gravel pit. They also pointed out that no photographs were taken of the bones as they were found. Next slide, please. Then Kathleen, in the brief, these next few paragraphs points out in headings that bones from all of the sites had the same level of degradation. We all know what's meant by that they were burned for a similar amount of time. Therefore, the logical conclusion is that they were all burned at the same time, but now they're in 3 different sites. They argued that a forensic anthropologist should have been present during the excavation for the bone collection. Pointed out that there was somebody available from DCI, but they were on standby an hour away, and they were never called in. Dr. Fairgrieve said that at the original site, you would have bones still connected. They fall apart when they move. The point being that there were literally no bones that were still connected. Teresa was burned in the Manitowoc gravel pit. The Dassey burn barrel was used to transport her bones, is what the defense argued at the time of trial. Next slide, please. Bobby testifies that John has only had 3 burn barrels, yet 4 are found. It's paragraph 56 of the motion. If that body was burned elsewhere and then moved and dumped on Mr. Avery's burn pit, then Stephen Avery is not guilty, pure and simple. That's an exact quote from the defense in their closing argument to the jury. That's how they portrayed the situation with the bones and being moved to the jury. If he's burned elsewhere and moved, he's not guilty, pure and simple. Next slide, please. The defense theory about the blood, bullets, and the key. So there are several points under this paragraph that Ms. Zellner lays out, and we'll just go through them quickly here. Stephen leaves blood, but no fingerprints in the RAV4. How is that possible? There's 8 unidentified prints that were never compared to Link and Colborn. No investigator saw blood stains in the RAV4 at the scene. There was no trace of Teresa and Stephen's trailer. No marks on the headboard she was tied to. And therefore, the state has switched theories that she's now murdered in the garage. Next paragraph. Next slide, please. Also, if Teresa was shot in the garage, her blood would be there somewhere. Stephen Avery's blood is found in the garage. This is part of the idiot savant argument that was the introduction that Eric Jose went through in the first segment. It was brilliant of Kathleen arguing that the state says at times that Stephen acts like an idiot in leaving behind evidence, but yet acts like a savant in being able to conceal certain evidence or only part of certain evidence. Mm-hmm. So if there's blood in the garage, you would think that somebody who's murdered by gunshot would leave blood. B, if Stephen had killed her, he would not have left her key in his bedroom. C, Stephen would not have held onto the key after November 4th and 5th when the media showed up. D, the key could not have landed the way it did. It is also unusual that there is not a mixture of DNA on the key. Also, no visible blood when Stephen was actively bleeding. Stephen's DNA on the key is from his toothbrush. Only Stephen's DNA is found on the key. The cabinet allegedly containing the key was never brought into the court by the state. KRATZ lied to the jury about Stephen's blood on the exterior of the tailgate. There's actually a tiny amount of Stephen's blood in the RAV4. Next slide, please. 1996 blood vial was the source of the blood, planted blood in the RAV4. Kathleen points out in the motion for post-conviction relief that the defense argued that there was only one possible source. The defense said that blood was obtained from a blood vial located in the clerk's office, that vial was sealed with ordinary Scotch tape, not tape that you would normally see found to seal a piece of critical evidence like blood. That Link knew that the court file existed and that the blood vial would be located in the courthouse because of his prior experience as a evidence custodian technician at the sheriff's office. The defense argued that blood was planted within 4 hours of the RAV4 being found. Defense argued that police officers, law enforcement have devices such as Slim Jims that they can open locked doors. They also argued to the jury that Pam never checked if the cargo door was locked. Next paragraph. Next slide, please. Thanks. Lieutenant Link's false testimony. The defense laid out for the jury that there were inconsistencies in Lieutenant Link's testimony and that they could consider to be false testimony. There was, of these things that were inconsistent, there no login entry for him on November 5th showing that he entered into the crime scenes for evidence search, where there was testimony that he was clearly present on November 5th. Lieutenant Link was the person who found the magic key. 4 months later, Lieutenant Link is on scene when the magic bullet is found. Lieutenant Link volunteered to work on the Halbach case from the very beginning when it was just a missing person case. Lieutenant Link was in the garage for over 2 hours when the shell casings were found. On March 1st, a damaged bullet fragment was found in Stephen's garage. Next slide. Damaged bullet, item FL, not linked to shell casings found in the Avery garage. The defense spent a lot of time on item FL because it was a damning, crucial piece of evidence that needed to be addressed. They brought in Raleigh Johnson, who is the owner of the property that Stephen Avery and his girlfriend at the time lived on in the red trailer. He testified, as many of you saw in MAM1 and MAM2, that he fired thousands of rounds on that property and that he never picked up any bullets. The defense also argued that Stephen prints are not on any of the shell casings. They argued that a second bullet fragment, that's item FK, that was found in the garage, could not be matched to Raleigh's gun. And they also questioned the analysis of the bullet fragments. Jerome Buting stated that the photographs that the state's expert Newsom were using did not appear to him to be similar at all. Next slide, please. Ms. Culhane's bias against Mr. Avery. Although Culhane helped exonerate Avery in 2003, the defense argued she also helped to convict him in 1985. They pointed out they were able to locate, the defense team was, evidence and present to the jury that Fassbender asked Culhane to put Teresa in the garage or trailer. That's paragraph 70, the MCR, motion for post-conviction relief, the MPCR. Next slide, please. Other auto trader appointments made by someone other than the car owner. The state had contended that Stephen had lured Teresa to his property by using his sister's name as the person who was selling a vehicle and needed to be photographed. The defense produced evidence. People often give Auto Trader the actual owner's name rather than the person who is arranging to list the ad. They were able to elicit testimony from Steve Schmitz that had happened actually earlier in the day. The state's theory of murder, mutilation, and concealment of evidence is illogical. The defense argued that some of the arguments that were illogical were that Teresa was killed in the garage, that she was burned in the pit behind Stephen's garage, that she was thrown in the back of the RAV4, that Stephen put her electronic devices in his own burn barrel, and then spread some of her bones into the neighboring quarry. They argued that if she was burned on the property, the most logical place to do it would be in the smelter, not in a burn pit behind Stephen Avery's garage. Next slide, please. Dr. LeBeau's opinion is flawed. Dr. LeBeau is from the FBI crime lab. He testified that the blood found in the RAV4 could not be the blood in the vial because it did not contain EDTA. The defense pointed out that LeBeau was claiming that untested swabs contained EDTA, and that's just impossible. If they're not tested, how could you possibly know? And they actually did a pretty effective job of that. LeBeau's EDTA testing was flawed, according to the defense. Next slide, please. The defense timeline placed Ms. Halbach at the Avery property between 3:30 and 3:45. This disputed Bobby's testimony about seeing Teresa. Pointed out that Scott and Bobby alibi each other and the manner in which they do it, passing each other on a 55-mile-an-hour two-lane road. And that testimony was in MAM1. They brought out the fact that the bus driver saw Teresa taking pictures of a van. That time would have been inconsistent with the state's timeline. The propane truck driver saw a green SUV leave the Avery salvage yard on October 31st, again, at a timeline that would be consistent with the defendants. He sees a car leaving at the time that would support the fact that Teresa was alive and well at the time that she, from the Avery salvage yard. Next slide, please. The defense contended other witnesses were suspicious. Keep in mind the judge ruled that they could not point to any suspects, and so they were limited to doing the best that they could. And this is some of the other suspects that they pointed to within the confines of what they were hamstringed from doing based on the court's ruling. No one checked Scott Tadich's story that he visited his mother on October 31st, nor that he knows the fire was at 7:45 because he was trying to make it home to watch his favorite show, Prison Break. They pointed out that Scott Tadich's first interview has no mention of a fire. They pointed out that Blaine said that Bobby was asleep between 3:30 and 3:45, so he couldn't have seen Teresa at 3:45. They also pointed out to the jury that Zipperer was belligerent, that Avery was not, that Ryan Hilligus has no alibi, that Scott Blodorn didn't report her missing for 4 days, that Brad Check had no alibi, and Tom Pierce never reported her missing. That's about the limit of what they could get in as evidence, given the court's ruling in the Denny motion. Next slide, please. State's expert testimony that voicemail deletions required use of password. They pointed out that the state's own expert admitted that it requires the use of a password to delete voicemails, which means that makes it more probable that somebody that knew Teresa is the one that deleted those voicemails. They also argued that
not likely to have that. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay. Mr. Avery behaved like an innocent man. Stephen Avery, his behavior after all of this occurred was consistent with someone who was innocent, not someone who is likely guilty. And they tried to show that by him not destroying many pieces of evidence that could have been destroyed, like hiding the key that was eventually found in his house would be just one example. He didn't empty out the barrels that contained electronic devices, which he easily could have done between the time of the alleged murder at his property and the time when police first started snooping around there. He invited several of Blaine's friends over later that week for a bonfire. Next slide, please. Sergeant Colborn called in Ms. Halbach's place on plates on November 3rd or November 5, 2005. Many of you know this.
Sorry, November 3 or 4.
I'm sorry, November 3rd or 4th of 2005. Many of you know this is now the subject of a lawsuit between Andy Colborn and Netflix and the producers of the documentaries Making a Murderer. The defense argued that Colborn was, the call was likely on November 4th, because that was his day off, and he would have probably had his cell phone, which we know from the dispatch call, was called in by cell rather than on his squad car radio. Defense counsel argued the call was from November 5th because it was his day off.
4th.
Would not have been in his squad car. During closing argument, so we all saw the testimony, the cross-examination of Colborn when he's played that call. They also played it in closing argument. Their closing argument trial defense counsel played both the Sergeant Colborn dispatch call tape and Detective Jacobs' tape from November 5th at 11:30 after the vehicle was discovered. On Jacobs' tape, that's that famous quote or excerpt, "Is he in custody yet?" Showing, arrested judgments, the biggest understatement of the year. But yeah, they find that the car is called in, and then within minutes, you have somebody from Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department saying, "Is he in custody yet?" Meaning Stephen Avery. Now, that's the end of that subheading. She then goes on in 3 other paragraphs that don't really correspond to the plates thing, but we'll just go through those quickly. Paragraph 90 of the MPCR, she mentions that the state argued that Culhane's protocols weren't followed with regard to testing item FL, and therefore that test should have been considered contaminated and of no evidentiary value. Paragraph 91, that the EDTA testing done didn't follow protocol. And paragraph 92, trial defense counsel argued that if evidence was planted, they offered the rationale that the investigators were not doing it to frame an innocent man. Rather, they were trying to ensure the conviction of someone they had decided was guilty. That was in anticipation or response to KRATZ's crazy argument that if you believe the defense, that you would have to conclude that police officers murdered Teresa. Next slide, please. So that's the end of the state's case that they presented at the time of trial, and I'm going to turn things back over to
defense, folks. Sorry. Injustice prevailed, and it continues. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. All right, folks, so keep in mind right now, basically 45 minutes to an hour from the moment you are at right now, where you're seeing this, is the live should be starting approximately 45 minutes to an hour from now. So get your questions together. Remember your slide numbers down in the bottom right-hand corner. Get all that together, and bring those questions to the live chat. Little special something I believe that's happening. I was talking to Miss Struncy today, Miss Tracy Struncy. She's the lovely lady that runs basically a lawyer Facebook group. She's actually learned, the law there in Wisconsin. She, I believe, is going to be joining us for the live Q&A, so that may be interesting for some of you. I know a lot of you like Tracy, so that may be interesting for you, but that's what we got coming up here tonight. So hope you guys all enjoyed it.
Great news. Hope she can make it. I
do believe she did kind of agree to it. So as long as I get all these things out in the timing that I said, I believe she'll be there. So anyways, hope you guys all enjoyed it. Hope you found it interesting. Thank you, Travis, for being here. Thank you very much, Julie, for all your hard work on these lovely presentations that are absolutely off the chart. So awesome. Thank you so much for that. Alrighty, so that's it for this one, folks. Hey, hope to see you on the live. Make sure you've got your questions. Make sure you remember your slide number. Help us out to know, so that we can easily figure out what your question's about quicker. Love to see you there. Love to see the enthusiasm. So see you over at the live, and hope to see many of you there. And that's about it for today. If you haven't already, please hit subscribe, and we'll see you.